The trade market for Justin Fields might not be as robust as the Chicago Bears hoped, and it might not happen as quickly as Ryan Poles wanted it to.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we look at what might be in store for the Chicago Bears and Justin Fields over the next week or so when it comes to the trade market, where all signs point to the Bears moving on from Fields in a trade here probably sooner rather than later, but it might not be quite as soon as Ryan Poles wanted. We'll take a look at where that timeline might be and why they might have to wait for Kirk Cousins at the very least before the Bears can get a deal done with a potential landing spot for Fields, and how that may end up ultimately affecting the trade value. It kind of depends on where Fields ranks among quarterback options for all of these other teams. And I kind of want to look at not exactly the worst case scenario, but how does this go if maybe the market isn't so robust? Where does the trade market land there if maybe there aren't teams clamoring over each other quite as much to get Fields when they have other quarterback options available? And just how far down could this get here? But the timing is interesting because we talked to Ryan Poles at the Combine last week in Indianapolis, and he said ideally, if they're going to move on from Fields, they'd want to get a deal done like by free agency, like by the start of free agency, which I think technically free agency officially opens a week from Wednesday, but the free agent tampering period is next Monday. So we're coming on essentially less than a week here, or about a week, until free agents can start signing with other teams. And so that's not a lot of time to get a deal done if you're trying to move Justin Fields by then. And it feels to me like either Poles gets a deal done here quickly, like within the next couple of days, or it's going to have to wait a little while longer, because especially coming out of the buzz around the NFL Combine being in Indianapolis last week, all the talk was, of course, about the Bears, the #1 overall pick. But when it got to the topic of free agency, all the talk was about Kirk Cousins. Like, he's really the big free agency domino that needs to fall. I mean, obviously, teams that aren't interested in a quarterback, there's some defensive players that could be free agency dominoes, but like quarterbacks drive the conversation, and Kirk Cousins is the one at the top of this conversation. And he's kind of the thing that a lot of teams might want to go after as their first choice. And then if Cousins is gone, that's then when you get into the conversation about Fields versus some of the other quarterback options available to these teams. But it certainly starts with Minnesota, Kirk Cousins' team, that can still, anytime between now and free agency, re-sign him. It sounds like, based on everything we were hearing in Indianapolis, that the Vikings coaching staff would like to have Kirk Cousins back. The Vikings front office a little less eager to get Kirk Cousins back. And so how that manifests itself in negotiations will be interesting, because we know Kirk Cousins has prioritized fully guaranteed contracts at this point in his career. And the Vikings are at this point where it's like, okay, maybe we want Kirk Cousins back, but we also need to work on a more of a long-term plan. And so if Kirk Cousins wants, say, a 3-year fully guaranteed contract, you're locked into Kirk Cousins for 3 more full years. And it sounds like Minnesota's more in the range of like, maybe we do 2, if the price is right, and you could still potentially draft a quarterback and leave him on the bench for a couple of seasons, but they don't want to have a quarterback on the bench for like 3 full seasons underneath Kirk Cousins and go the full like Jordan Love style of quarterback development there. So I have a feeling what's going to happen is Kirk Cousins will hit free agency, and then he'll go to Atlanta and say, Atlanta, will you give me 3 fully guaranteed years. And if Atlanta says yes, then I think Kirk Cousins isn't going back to Minnesota. The rumors are that Atlanta really wants Kirk Cousins, as that's a high priority for them. Denver is also interested in Kirk Cousins. There's a lot of potential players in here for Kirk, for teams that might just want a more of a sure thing veteran quarterback than Fields, who certainly has a lot of upside and a lot of reason for teams to like Fields, but Cousins is a little bit more like, right now, you know what you're getting, exactly what you're going to get, and can help you, if you're a team that's ready to compete, like to really jumpstart that. If you're a team like Atlanta that feels like you're a quarterback away, or even Denver that's a very veteran team with a veteran coach, like I think all 3 of those teams, including Minnesota, would prefer Kirk Cousins as their top option. Now, if Cousins would prefer to stay in Minnesota, and if, say, none of the teams are willing to give him 3 years and they're all at 2, well, then maybe he stays in Minnesota. Then maybe Atlanta all of a sudden goes to plan B, or Denver goes to plan B, and maybe Justin Fields moves up in that process. Like that's what really makes this difficult, is that I don't think you're going to see, and can always be wrong on this, but I don't think you're going to see Atlanta make their best offer for Justin Fields before the start of free agency, or Denver, or any of these teams, because, well, let me see what we can get for Kirk Cousins. And then if Cousins is gone, then maybe they'd be willing to give up more for Fields if they see him as another good option for them, or maybe they got a couple different quarterback options and Fields kind of becomes a fallback for some of these teams, and then they're never willing to give up all that much. And so that's where Ryan Poles is in this tricky position, where ideally he wants to get a deal done soon for Justin and for the Bears to just have some directional clarity here, but you run this risk of like, okay, if I've got an offer on the table right now, is it less than I want? Probably. Like, do I take this deal that's less than I want, but just to get a deal done? Or do I wait and see, like, as the quarterback dominoes fall a little bit, I'm confident that Fields will be a really good option for these teams, so they might want to give up more for him a little bit later on down the line? Or do I risk one of these teams offering me a deal now ends up getting Kirk Cousins, and their deal, the trade offer is no longer then on the table, and maybe Minnesota needs a quarterback, but I don't know that I'm going to trade Justin Fields within the division to the Minnesota Vikings. So that's where it becomes really difficult, and why Baker Mayfield, or excuse me, getting ahead of myself, why Kirk Cousins is really the domino that the Bears have to wait and fall here. I was going to mention Baker Mayfield is kind of the other one here as the other bona fide starting quarterback on the market, and although it still feels likely to me that he ends up back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that could bring them into the quarterback conversation if Baker does not end up back in Tampa. We'll kind of see how that goes. But it's really Kirk Cousins and then, to a lesser extent, Baker Mayfield. Those are kind of the big quarterback dominoes that need to fall before teams, I think, will be really able to go all in on Fields there. But all this becomes a question of okay, where does Fields rank in other teams' eyes as far as available quarterbacks this offseason? Because that includes the list of free agents, that includes potential other trade candidate quarterbacks from other teams, and that includes the NFL draft, where only some teams are going to have access to the top quarterbacks, and there's a lot to weigh there. So we'll kind of place Justin Fields in this quarterback market for a few different teams to kind of see, okay, how many dominoes might need to fall before Fields becomes available? Or are there some teams that just would jump to the front of the line and say, no, we're not in on Cousins or Baker Mayfield. We're not in on these rookie quarterbacks. Justin Fields is the guy we got to be in on. So we'll kind of look at all the different moving parts and where Fields fits into that quarterback hierarchy next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. I cannot recommend doing online therapy enough. It's something that I do every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen. I like to talk about it on here just because it's similar to going to the gym, right? For my body, because I want my body to be strongest and at its best. I go to therapy because I want my brain to be at its best and to be its strongest. It's not about it being broken or being in a crisis mode. It's just about taking care of yourself, and therapy can be a really important part of that process for a lot of people. So if you've been thinking about giving therapy a try, check out BetterHelp. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible. They can suit it right around your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and you can get matched with a licensed therapist. And if that first therapist just isn't quite the right one for you, that's okay. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Kirk Cousins feels like the first quarterback domino that likely will need to fall before a Justin Fields trade can happen. But Justin Fields might be the second domino there. Like, I don't necessarily think we're sitting here saying, okay, every free agent quarterback has to sign before a Justin Fields trade gets done. Because you start to look at the list of free agent and even potential trade quarterbacks available out there, and it's not like it's a group of a bunch of great starting caliber players. Like, you could make an argument that Justin Fields is the second best quarterback available after Kirk Cousins this offseason. Every team is going to have a different evaluation on Fields and a different evaluation of what they value at the quarterback position. Some teams might see Justin Fields' athletic ability and say, wow, we can scheme up the passing game and we can scheme up receivers for him, but we can't scheme up that running. Like, that running game is the gravy, the bonus. Like, so we want that more than, say, Gardner Minshew from the Indianapolis Colts, for example. Like, where Minshew's not going to give you quite the mobility, but maybe you feel like as a passer, he's a little bit more consistent throwing over the middle of the field. I mean, again, we're not here to like definitively put him head to head against every single one of these quarterbacks, but a team might think that and say, well, we don't really value the mobility as much. That's not as important to us. Let's just give us a quarterback who we like better at the line of scrimmage, operating the passing game, and maybe teams will feel differently. But I think, across the board, it's not a quarterback free agent class that you really get excited about. So it's Kirk Cousins at the top. Then you've got, Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans is out there. Jacoby Brissett from the Washington Commanders. And then, mentioned Gardner Minshew from the Colts, Jameis Winston perhaps from the Saints, but it's not incredible it's not a great group there. And keep in mind, Cousins is 36, Ryan Tannehill is 36. The other guys are a little bit, closer on the slightly younger side, but Justin Fields is younger than all of those names. Jacoby Brissett is 32. So there's certainly some specific added value that Justin Fields has. Plus, he's on just a $3 million contract this year compared to everyone else you're going to have to pay market value. And every name I mentioned there made more last season than Justin Fields will make this season. So every other quarterback is going to cost you more in 2024 than Justin Fields. Now, the difference is you're going to have to give up some amount of draft pick compensation for Fields, and all those other guys will come without having to give up a draft pick. And so how you value that in your team's draft capital is an important part of the equation. Fields also has the fifth-year option question. The deadline is in May to decide whether you want to accept or decline Justin Fields' fifth-year option. It'll cost you like 25, something like that, $1 million next season if you accept that fifth-year option. You also have the option to trade for Justin Fields and negotiate a new contract. And you could do something similar to what the Green Bay Packers did with Jordan Love's contract, where, okay, you became our starter at the end of your rookie deal. We don't want to guarantee you a super long-term deal, but can we find a balance where it's a 2-year contract? We give you a raise in year 1, so he's not making just peanuts this year, but then have a bigger raise in year 2, but you can kind of cut him if year 1 doesn't work well and kind of give both sides some incentive there. I mean, I think there's a way to make the Justin Fields contract, and you can decline the fifth-year option and still work on an extension that makes sense for both sides there. And so it's hard for me to sit here and say, like, definitively, yes, Justin Fields should be every team's second-ranked quarterback. But, like, if you start to go a little bit head-to-head there on the free agent quarterback list, like, would you rather have Fields or Ryan Tannehill? Well, I mean, we saw Ryan Tannehill struggle and more or less kind of get benched in Tennessee. So he's not necessarily coming in with a bunch of shine where you feel like, wow, this is a great quarterback option for us. And he's also 36, but might cost you quite a bit. But, like, to me, he's more like a bridge starter type guy. And certainly there's been murmurs that Pittsburgh would like to reunite Ryan Tannehill with Arthur Smith, who was previously his offensive coordinator with the Tennessee Titans. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But, like, Tannehill to me is not like head and shoulders clearly better than Fields. I could see teams valuing Ryan Tannehill as better than Fields. I don't think it's outrageous to argue either direction on that. Like, Tannehill has been a 4,000-yard quarterback, albeit earlier in his career, has done that in the last couple seasons, but has been a consistent 3,700-yard a season guy when he's actually played all 17 games. It's just been a couple of years since he's been on the field and healthy for all 17 games, and this past season clearly kind of the worst of that. So has he declined to a point where he's clearly worse than Justin Fields? Possibly, but some teams might say, well, no, I think we can still get that better Ryan Tannehill out of him, so I like Ryan Tannehill better than Fields, right? That's where it's murky for a lot of these guys. Or you can talk about Jacoby Brissett, where, okay, it's not necessarily about is Jacoby Brissett truly the better quarterback. I mean, we've seen he hasn't been able to really hold down a starting job anywhere consistently enough, but, like, value-wise, would you rather have Jacoby Brissett as a bridge quarterback who can get you by. Say you want to draft a rookie, but have a veteran there to get you by, like for $6 or $7 million. Brissett looks like a fine quarterback, and a good average type quarterback. We saw him in Cleveland a couple of years ago play well when Deshaun Watson was still suspended and still a mess that they're trying to clean up over there. Like Brissett looked decent enough. So would you rather have a cheap, decent quarterback? Maybe you can put Brissett and even Gardner Minshew in that same kind of category there. Like a quarterback who's no one's arguing that Brissett or Minshew is as talented as Justin Fields. That's obviously not the case. Justin Fields can do a lot more than those quarterbacks are able to do, but like it's at the value, right? To not have to give up a draft pick for it and to not have to pay him very much and to be able to control that contract. You could sign Brissett to a 2 or 3 year deal worth, $8-ish million a year and feel like you're pretty set there. Or it could even be a potential 1 year deal type guy. Like all of those guys in that conversation, it's not about being better than Fields. It's about what's better for the team. If the Bears are sitting firm and we need a second round pick, well, is Fields going to move the needle that much for me that I give him a second round pick and then still have to figure out some contract stuff down the line? Or would I be better off just keeping my draft picks, grabbing this other free agent quarterback that's not as good, but I would rather have my draft picks and not have to deal as much with the field stuff? Like that's where it becomes hard to slot Fields in specifically because it's going to depend on every individual team situation, right? If I'm a team that doesn't have any quarterback, or if I'm a team that's picking later in the first round, I might look at it and say, man, I'm not going to be able to get a rookie quarterback that I really love. So I need a guy who I can feel like is a starter right now who can really win me some games, not just purely a bridge guy, but someone who can help me win now. Then maybe Fields is a little bit of a better option. Or if I'm a team picking in the teens, if I'm Denver or Minnesota or even the Raiders in that conversation, like maybe you feel like you can get a first round quarterback there and then sign a veteran to be a 1 year kind of starter, the true bridge quarterback. So you can sit that rookie for ideally a year, but then go with the rookie. And maybe you don't want to trade for Fields just to have him be ahead of a rookie quarterback for a couple of seasons. If you're going to trade for Fields, you really want him to compete to start, potentially either with a veteran or right with, that starting job. If it's New York or with the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Okay. Like if you're going to trade for Fields, it's because you want to give this guy a chance to be your long-term starter. And again, Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield look like the only long-term starters in the free agent market potentially coming up here, and both could still re-sign with their teams. And if those two guys re-sign with their teams before free agency, Justin Fields is your top option for a long-term starter between now and the NFL draft. And if you're not picking in the top 3 or 4 in this draft, you're going to have a hard time finding a top long-term option in this draft. And so then Fields becomes that much more attractive, and maybe you're more willing to give up that second round pick to get him, and a Fields trade happens sooner rather than later. Like that's where it's impossible for us to sit here today and say definitively this trade isn't going to happen anytime soon, or this trade is going to happen really, really soon, because these these Cousins and Mayfield dominoes really make this blurry for Ryan Poles, who's going to sit here and certainly have some urgency behind it, but also be a little bit patient and let some things play out. But I'm curious, like, how patient he's willing to be and how much of a stickler he's willing to be as far as the trade value he needs for Justin Fields when it comes to this idea of him also wanting to do right by Fields. And I kind of want to look at where this could go. Maybe if the market doesn't materialize as strong as they want, like what's the least Ryan Poles would take for Fields, and what situation might be the best team or situation to send him to do right by Fields, even if it's not the team that's going to send the Bears the most draft capital in return. We'll explore those ideas next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And now is a great time to get started on FanDuel because new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you place a $5 bet on anything, any sport, and you win. Not only do you get your winnings for that $5 bet, but you also will get $150 in bonus bets added on top of your winnings that you can use to bet on the NFL draft coming up, the NBA season, we're in hockey season, college basketball, soccer, baseball is right around the corner as well. There's a lot of different ways to play and have a lot of fun on FanDuel, all in their app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to get your $150 in bonus bets, visit FanDuel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA and NFL. So what if Justin Fields' trade market isn't great? What if teams are interested, but not climbing over each other trying to compete to get him? But okay, if we can't get Kirk Cousins and we can't get Baker Mayfield, then maybe we'd consider throwing you a couple of draft picks and making a deal done. Like what does that ultimately look like? And I think a couple of ideas here come to mind is like, what would be the lower end of the threshold? I think the Bears are looking for a second round pick plus some change. Maybe, could they settle on a third round pick and some change or whatever it might be? Sure. There were also murmurings at the combine that, maybe it could be a first round pick swap. Could you exchange the 9th overall pick with the 7th overall pick for the Falcons? So the Bears would give up Fields and then move up in the first round or move up to the Giants pick at 6, something like that, where it's Fields and the Bears first round pick to the Giants for their first round pick plus a 4th round pick, something like that. Like there are different ways to do the trade evaluation here. It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically this year, give me a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Like it could be a future draft pick. It could be a pick swaps. I mean, there's some different ways you can tweak the ways to get the draft compensation value here that can fit for both teams. But if teams aren't willing to give up a ton for Fields, I think the absolute floor where like you would not accept anything less than this, and I don't think you would even accept this, but you certainly don't go any lower than what Trey Lance got for the San Francisco 49ers. Going to the Dallas Cowboys as purely a team wanting to trade for a backup quarterback with high upside. Like if no team says, we really want Fields to be our starter, and every team says, well, maybe we'd consider him as a high-end backup, a 4th round pick is like the absolute lowest I think you would possibly see the Bears get for Justin Fields. Obviously, you're aiming a lot higher than that, and you're hoping for as much as you can, but I also question exactly how firm and how much of a stickler Ryan Poles is going to be on this, with the way that he talks about doing right by Justin Fields and not wanting to drag this out. That doesn't sound to me like a general manager who's going to wait until the very last minute to squeeze every possible draft pick he can out of this deal. And he might be more inclined to say, okay, if we get any kind of offer that feels close enough, reasonable enough to what we want, and we feel like the timing and the destination are good for Justin Fields, maybe let's just take that. Like, he's not going to rush and just take the first thing that they give him. But as we get closer to the start of free agency, maybe we get to next weekend, like right before free agency, and he says, all right, we've gotten everybody's best offers. We don't really love any of these offers, but we think this specific team would be a good landing spot for Fields, and their offer is close to everybody else's offer. So we'll take, a 3rd and a 4th round pick from, I don't even know, New England or whatever, to send Fields there. And sure, it's not the 2nd round pick that we wanted, and it's not great value like we wanted, but we're getting Justin Fields on his new team early so he can be in a good spot. We're sending him to a team that we think he can be successful in, that he should be happy in. Like, we're doing right by Fields in all these other ways, and we're getting some compensation in return, right? They're not taking the 4th round pick for Trey Lance, but they're not getting the 1st round pick maybe that they would have ideally hoped to be able to get for Justin Fields. Like, that's what I'm wondering if where Ryan Poles ultimately ends up. I mean, is it disrespectful to say settling in this potential deal for Fields? Like, if eventually you just want to get a deal done, and if you got an offer on the table, all right, take it. So it brings up kind of another question of like, where is that best spot for Justin Fields? Like, I think everyone says Atlanta right away, and I think that's where I would go as well. But the question is more whether Atlanta wants him and is willing to give up much for him, or whether Atlanta wants Kirk Cousins by all accounts. So presumably Atlanta is the best spot for Fields, but might not be the spot that ends up getting Fields. We'll see how they end up playing it out. But I think if you're trying to do right by Fields, Atlanta definitely feels like a great spot, but doesn't feel as likely at this point. Obviously, Pittsburgh is interesting because, it'd be great for him to work for Mike Tomlin, who certainly runs a great organization over there. I heard some stories at the Combine about some of the damage control and the way Mike Tomlin held things together behind the scenes in Pittsburgh. And let's just say, I learned at the Combine why the Chicago Bears did not draft George Pickens, because Mike Tomlin is holding that together in Pittsburgh really, really well. But like it's all Mike Tomlin holding a lot of that together. And so could that, I still think again, that's a good organization, a good team, a place where he would have a genuine spot to compete and start. I think he's better than Kenny Pickett and could start there. Like, that would be a good spot to send Justin Fields. And I've heard people throw out Benjamin Solak from The Ringer, I mentioned this in person in Indy, and I think he wrote about it in his column on Monday. Like the Cleveland Browns as an interesting team for Fields, where to give them an out for Deshaun Watson, because that continues to be a mess for them. And like Fields wouldn't be handed the starting job by any means, but like if they liked Fields and wanted to just eat the Watson thing as a big loss and then move on with Fields, good running game, good offensive line, some decent weapons there, pretty darn good defense. Like that would be another spot that feels like you could be a good landing spot for Fields. I mean, I don't know if that counts as doing right by Fields if you feel like he's not going to get to be, the week 1, day 1 starter there per se, but it kind of depends on what Fields' priorities are there, right? Like is the priority finding the long-term home where he can really, shine over the course of the next 5 to 10 years? Or is doing right by Fields sending him to a team where he can have a really, really good season and then cash in with a big contract? Maybe a big contract potentially somewhere else or with that team. But like, what is Fields' priority there? And I have a feeling once Ryan Poles formally makes the decision to trade Justin Fields, which I think he already has in his head, but I think once he's ready to move forward with that trade, then he's going to go to Justin and kind of consult with him and say, hey, Justin, we're going to trade you. What would you think about Atlanta? What would you think about New England? What would you think about Pittsburgh? What would you think about Denver? Like kind of walk through these options and say, all right, we can't guarantee that we're going to get you to your number 1 spot, but like, where would you like to go? And how would you feel about this team? We're kind of leaning them towards this team. Would you be happy with this team, or, is that really something you don't want to do? Like, I think they are genuinely going to try and treat Justin Fields well through this process and ultimately send him somewhere, maybe not get as much as you or I would have wanted the Bears to get for him, but still get something decent. And we move on to life with Caleb Williams coming in the near future, because that is all everyone is talking about coming out of the NFL scouting combine, that Caleb Williams is going to be a Chicago Bear. The Bears moved back their visit with Caleb that they were originally going to do right after the combine. Like, it seems like the wheels are churning. So whether you like it or not, get ready for number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams, as your Chicago Bears quarterback moving forward. We're going to go in depth on Caleb here ahead of the NFL draft, but free agency is so close to us. We got to start doing some free agency previews coming up here all week long here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Keep making us your first listen. Coming back tomorrow as we'll keep getting you ready for free agency around the corner. Any and other big news that comes out of the combine. It does feel like a Fields trade is a possibility literally any day now, but it could take longer than that. But I'd say any day between now and the next 10 to 14 days feels like the window. Combine's done. Negotiations were really kicked off there. It could be, we'll see where it goes. But if it happens, we'll break it all down for you here on the podcast and make sure that no matter when and where and how it happens, we will still give you another opportunity to bear down.